Hey everyone, this is Sarah Sladek, and I am so glad you're here for another Trends Talk. I am tuning in actually today from Canada. And guess what I'm being asked about? As I'm traveling throughout Canada, people are asking me about the election, the presidential election that just took place. And a couple weeks ago, I was in the Netherlands, and guess what they were asking me about? The election. It is top of everyone's mind, not just in the United States. And I wanted to have this follow-up conversation with Nick Roberts, who is one of the youngest elected officials in the United States, to talk a little bit about, yes, the election and politics, but also all eyes are turning right now to Gen Z. And we're asking, are they going to run for office? Are they going to get involved with voting and with advocacy? What's are the trends on the horizon? So, Nick Roberts, welcome to the show. Please join me on camera, and we're going to get this party started. So I have five.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have 5 questions for Nick today. And Nick, maybe you want to just give a little intro about yourself before we kick off those questions.
Sure. So again, appreciate being here. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. Lived my entire life here. Among other things, I'll jump to the main story. I'm on the Indianapolis City-Council. I was elected last year. I was actually the first Democrat to win with the district that I have now. It was changed around a few times, but first Democrat to win it. 24 years old. I was 21 when I started running. I was 23 when I was elected. So had been very young when I was in office. I'd been involved in politics for 7-8 years now. Before I got involved myself, I was working on campaigns, running campaigns. I have a dating consulting business where I do a lot of data analytics work with campaigns, some governmental agencies, and everything else. So I really think data is where my intersection with politics comes in well. It's a fascination of mine, just how these things work. I always have my elected official hat on and my pundit hat on proudly, even though pundits get a lot of flack. I try to be as objective about it as possible and non-sensational, but I always try to be as reasonable with it as possible. But through that, I've been in office now a year. It's been great. Of course, I am very young for the position, much younger than most of my colleagues. Youngest of any of the major cities in America for being an elected official. So it's a very unique opportunity to get the chance to work on these issues and be in some ways a representative for youth, and really just enjoying it every day. So I'm glad to be here and glad to answer questions and appreciate again for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So data, running for office at a very young age, you are definitely the guy we want to talk to about trends. So let's jump in. And because I'm on the road, I don't have my little bell. So I'm just going to go ding. Round 1. What current stat or data point best summarizes the need to increase civic engagement among our youngest citizens? So, Nick, what's your take on this? You just said you're a data guy. So what's the stat or data point you want to share today?
Yeah, so this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but if you just look at turnout, we don't have a finalized turnout number just with the exit polls not being finalized of young voters around the country, but it wasn't good. And this was a presidential election. In Indiana, we have one of the lowest turnouts in the country, so I can speak also in Indiana, but we always, presidential elections are the highest turnout, then midterms and municipal elections. Last year for my municipal election, the vote, even though I was on the ballot, the turnout for young voters was between 18 and 29 was something like 6-7%. I mean, it was just totally abysmal. In a presidential election in my district, it was like 60%, 50-60%, which is still low, but it's better than a municipal election. But I mean, if you compare the disparity of just older voters versus younger voters and turning out, it's night and day. Last year in my municipal election, the average voter was 61 years old, right? So, and that's not representative of the actual people who live in the area, but it's very difficult to get young people to vote in general, but specifically for local elections. Although for presidential elections, as we saw, it's still a huge challenge. And I think there are multiple angles you can look at it from. Of course, there are issues of voter access and disengagement on certain issues. I mean, the Gaza issue is big. The economy is big for a lot of people. But I think in general, I mean, the leading cause, I think, is just apathy. A lot of people are disengaged from the political process. They feel like their vote doesn't matter. They feel like their voice doesn't matter. They feel like nothing's going to change, so I bother. Like one vote doesn't make a difference. And I hear all these things constantly from friends of mine who, I try to encourage to vote. And thankfully, they're candid with me. I'd rather have them be candid with me about why they're not voting versus telling me they're voting than not actually doing, which I've had before too. But it's tough. And I think the apathy is the main thing. A lot of people just don't care that much. We have to work on that. We have to make sure we amplify youth voices so we can be the, advocates for change in our country. And there's a lot of work to do over the next 4 years to build up that political momentum for young people.
Absolutely. So, Nick, you mentioned apathy, and I'm just curious from a personal perspective, because you're in that generation. So, what inspired you to originally run for office?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm unique. Many of my peers have political families. I have a family where some people are interested in politics, but nobody's really involved in politics. Like my dad, he's a disabled veteran. He was gone my entire childhood. I understood public service from a young age. Some of my grandfathers are business owners. They were gone all day. I understood that because they were, doing things that were beyond just day-to-day life. And they, not to compare the two, but I always had people that served and gave back to others in my family. So that was an important thing to me. Like my grandma was a nurse too, same thing. So I always knew the value of, again, it's great to have opinions, but you also need to, put your money where your mouth is. Sometimes you get involved. And they always implemented that in me for things you care about to give back, right? And not just in a political way, but volunteering way in your community. Like my grandparents were very involved in the church, and always were the first ones to help out anybody in time of need. And really, I had a political interest, but it wasn't until 2016 when I had kind of my spark. I wanted Hillary Clinton to win over Donald Trump, and it didn't go that way. And I remember sitting in the living room with my grandmother at home, and we were chit chatting, and she's like, "Well, Nick, you're old enough now. You can do something about it. Like you're 16, you could, volunteer, do a job internship." I had no experience at that time, but I applied for an internship with Indianapolis Democrats. They said yes. I started working there. Then I started working on campaigns, started running campaigns. Really, was off to the races, and I was involved. And when I decided to run for city council, it was really just a matter of, why not me? I mean, I'd been involved for a while at that point. I had the support of a lot of elected officials. I've been involved in the community. I've been in the district my entire life. I felt like I had the work ethic to really not just win an election, but actually implement these things. And I've seen that obviously now because I have a lot of energy, thankfully, so I can get a lot of things done. And I've really gotten more done than I expected, which has been the best part. And I think a lot of it's because of, being able to, be tenacious and get things done. And it's been really awesome. So running for office, it was something I had to mull over for a while. And the angle of age was really the main reason that was holding me up. But really, I mean, it was much more of an asset in my election than it was a negative. And I was really, really fortunate that I had, the ability to do it. And I had the support of a lot of people that I built the trust with. And, I think in a lot of cases, people wouldn't really want a 21-year-old at the time, but 23 to run for office in a, big city. But I built trust with a lot of the people that, are involved in the party and involved in the area. And they believed in me and made it all work. So it's worked out very well.
Fantastic. Okay. So yeah, youth voter turnout is major. And I think it was in the 1970s when they lowered it to 18, and those first elections had really high youth voter turnout. People were super excited initially. Yep. And, now we have waning interest. So that's definitely a concern. Let's go to our second question. So ding, round two. There are a few young people running for office. So you just explained why you ran. But oh my gosh, we have had, for the past 10 years, the oldest Congress in history. And it just keeps getting older and trending older, which means that we don't have a whole heck of a lot of age diversity in leadership, which creates all kinds of issues. So what's it going to take to change that? What's your perception, Nick Roberts?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, there is you need to see other people doing it sometimes, because I think it's difficult for us to even imagine ourselves in the same world as other people that are older than us, that are in elected office. And I think first and foremost, people, unfortunately, want to immediately run for Congress or governor or something. And I'm like, that's not really how politics works. Like usually you have to get involved on the local level first. I think is the perfect opportunity for young people to run for office because, quite frankly, it's just it's much more of a practical office, and I think people really like having young people involved in all levels of government. But I think especially for the local offices, people really value it and they see the importance of it. And especially for me, I mean, I grew up in my area. I knew a lot of the people when I was outdoor knocking or whatever, and I think it was a lot more winnable than, of course, well, way more winnable than if I was to run for a federal office or some crazy thing in a few years. Um, so I think seeing other people in it is really important because a lot of us don't even imagine it, but also putting our expectations at a reasonable point and running for offices that are very winnable. I mean, there's a lot of these local races that are uncontested. And importantly, I think it just comes down to who can work harder, who can knock the most doors, who can even raise the most money. And I mean, I raised more money than any Indiana council candidate ever had because I was able to use social media to really get out there, to spread my message. I think a lot of times we think about it through a very well, and I also wasn't shy about asking for money, which is an important part of it too. But I think we think about it as a, only these rich old people are going to be donating to whatever. And that's true to some extent. But a lot of those rich old people love giving to young people. They want to see, the change happen and they want to see young people involved in the process. And yes, you might face some institutional barriers, but there will be a lot of doors that open up because you're young. People really want to see that in our government. So I think it's important to see, again, the young people in government that represent them, but also have mentors that can show the path. I always try to give that advice to people that are interested in running that are, my age, a little bit older, younger, but people that are younger. But also my biggest asset was not people that were my age that helped me out. It was people that were older than me that were assets to me in terms of giving me mentorship, giving me advice, people that were on the city council already, or people that had been on it before, or different elected offices, people that, other young candidates that had run that give me advice about what they dealt with. Having those people that can be my advocates was so important because I think it's one thing to have, a kid, quote unquote, a kid. I say kid kind of in a joking way because that's people always called me last year, in your mailbox because they're running for office. But it's another thing to have, the sheriff endorsed them. The state senator endorsed them, these people that they respect and trust, or these other institutions that are endorsing them. So I think those are really important to have, and building those relationships as early as possible to have their advice and their support, I think goes even a longer way for younger candidates than as a traditional elected official. Because I think if you're a 50-year-old, people will assume they're mature. People will assume they're reasonable in some ways. People will assume these things about them. But for us, you really have to go the extra mile to prove these things about you. And I think for young people, having those barriers eliminated by having the support of established people really does go a long way in seeing themselves winning for these elected offices.
Absolutely. When you go back in history and you look at when baby boomers were young, there was and World War II had ended, and there was a real focus on educating young people about government, but also encouraging them to run for office. And we're not really doing that nowadays. When you fast forward, we're in a different climate, but we've kind of stopped educating people about the importance of running and being involved in government. So that's very key, what you just said.
Yep.
Let's go to the next question. Round 3.
Ding.
Ding. How do you think your generation will change government and politics? This is a loaded question. So many things you could say here. So I'm really curious, Nick. Yeah. How's Gen Z going to change things?
Yeah, they're the obvious things, right? It's just a natural thing in politics. The younger elected officials will replace the older elected officials, and different perspectives are had, right? I'll mention housing as an example. That I think is a really popular one right now. But I have a much different perspective on the issue of housing than a lot of my colleagues do, because a lot of them have bought houses that are probably paid off, and they are not dealing with it in the same way. And I have never bought a house. I would like to in the next few years, but it's very expensive. And I think giving lens to different issues is very important. I think the way that social media presents different issues also affects it. A lot of people in my generation don't really watch cable news as much, which gives more of a, maybe I'm trying to find a way of saying it, more of a moderate dose. I think social media is more sensational in its political coverage, which I think is a blessing and a curse, more of a curse than a blessing, but that's okay. But I think in general, I think what we're going to see with our younger elected officials is a lot more engagement on social media. I think more value in the grassroots. I think just more of an engagement in a different way than older elected officials do. I think there are a lot of people that I associate with that assume that just going to the neighborhood meetings, and I do that a lot, trust me, I'm not discounting that importance, but there are a lot less people involved in neighborhood associations and civic associations. I mean, all the different civic associations of our society, even fraternities and sororities, Kiwanis, the Lions Club, the Rotary Clubs, all those things are waning in their influence in our culture, right? I think there are a lot of elected officials that value those things in terms of the how you win elections, and it's valuable to a large degree. I think it's still very important, but I think younger elected officials understand that social media and reaching out to people in a different way is very effective. And digital advertisements is highly important right now. A lot of younger people don't even open their mailboxes. So I talk a lot about mail. That's because that's who my audience was last year in my election, as an older electorate with the municipal election. But I think different issues again will be more important too. I think obviously on social issues, young voters are supportive of gay marriage and abortion rights and marijuana and all these different things. But I've seen some people argue that Gen Z is actually more conservative on some issues, like economic issues, but I think more populist also in general too. So they're kind of there's a counterbalance of issues, but I think overall, in general, I think it'll transition things even more heavily from kind of the traditional media and the traditional political activity into more grassroots and more social media oriented campaigning.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. And you mentioned social media. I think that potentially is a game changer right now because your generation is the first to be raised using social media. And when we start looking at that being a core platform for information gathering, well, there's algorithms and a lot of, bias that comes into play. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the social media algorithm is quite frankly kind of dangerous politically, because not only does it do that, but it really incentivizes people to argue and to have controversial content. And I mean, there's some extent to that, and then and you'll see it on all the different major TV broadcasts where it's the liberal arguing with a conservative, right? But I think on social media it incredibly encourages it because it encourages you. On TikTok, what the algorithm amplifies are things that not just get you to like them, but to comment on them, right? And oftentimes what makes you comment on it's what's negative. And it really encourages people to be involved in a negative discourse. Happy-go-lucky, inoffensive content is not what gets clicks and get amplified on social media, right? So I think that's going to be the tough thing, and that's what we're seeing in general. A lot of people see politics as a sport. They don't see it in terms of what actually it can do, especially on a local level, to actually improve people's lives. But they view it in terms of, my team versus their team. And I think the way that the algorithm really encourages that, especially by giving your team positive content and always showing the most offensive and negative things of the other team, really amplifies the worst part of our politics. And I don't know how it'll get better. I know Facebook has deprioritized political content, which I think is helpful. I know Instagram has as well, but TikTok and Twitter, I still call it Twitter, and Blue Sky. I don't know about Blue Sky, but TikTok and Twitter, especially from what I've seen, are probably the two worst offenders in terms of their political algorithms, because they really encourage, I don't know, more divisive rhetoric, and that's not going to be probably good for our long-term political discourse. But then again, I think a lot of people still do not consume content on their social media as much. But for Gen Z, it's definitely the case. We have to find ways of getting those actual getting people to prioritize the pragmatic, actual day-to-day instead of what they see on their social media as the only political content they consume.
Right. There's just one more thing I want to ask you about in relation to that question of how your generation will change politics and government. Are you envisioning that as more Gen Zs come into the fold, that there will be less meetings and kind of that bureaucracy and time-consuming tasks, that things will become a little bit more simplified, automated, fast-moving, innovative?
Yeah, Sarah, that's a good question. I guess I hadn't really thought about that part of it. I mean, honestly, we're so far away from Gen Zs being the bulk of elected officials that I think it's hard to imagine. But I mean, and as no surprise to you, I spend the majority of my time in meetings, right? And I've really grown to appreciate them because and this is where I think I can set myself apart from other elected officials. I have probably more energy and more capacity to work on these things. That's where I can be effective in getting things done. But
Yeah.
yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about that specific point. I do think there will be a deprioritization of kind of more of the mundane tasks that kind of are the antiquated um, areas, and maybe more focus on, not that the meetings are that, but more of a focus on, again, reaching people where they are. And that's why I think social media is very important, and why I see Gen Z elected officials do a much better job of engaging social media than a lot of older elected officials are. I think it's also uniqueness first and foremost, because there are not that many young elected officials that, we kind of stand out more, quite frankly. But I think we know what it takes and know what people like to see on those platforms. And I think it's a lot of authenticity, right? And you can say whatever about AOC or Maxwell Frost, but they're very authentic on their social media. AOC spends time live streaming video games on her Twitch or her Instagram, right? Cutting vegetables. And I have my disagreements with AOC on some things, but I think people like that authenticity. And I think there are a lot of people that, again, they think of the very old button-up way of portraying themselves in meetings and all that. And I try to do that myself. When I post on Facebook or Instagram, the posts I make about, meetings or updates or road closures, or all these things that are the most important parts of government, do not get that much engagement. But it's the things about, hey, I'm at a Colts game today. Hey, I'm with my family at a movie. Like those things, people love to see that. They love to see the authenticity. They love to see what I'm doing in my day-to-day life. And I think that's, again, Gen Z elected officials understand that. I mean, for me, I'm very unique also. My social media is the same. Like my personal and political social media are one and the same. I don't have anything separating them. So, and I try to infuse the two of them together because I think it is important. And I think that will be kind of how we change as a politics. I think people understand the blend of these. I think we're seeing that as there's less traditional people coming to politics. I mean, Trump obviously is the epitome of that. He is the least traditional politician ever. And obviously I disagree with him on a whole host of things, but I think that's what we're going to be seeing in the long term with our politics. The whole idea of a wooden politician that is, all these stereotypes of politician, I think, are going out the window. And we're seeing a lot more traditional people untraditional people coming into it, which is, going to change. I think social media is going to be the medium where a lot of that's going to happen.
That's an interesting thought. The rise of the untraditional politician. Okay. All right, let's go to our next question. Round 4. Ding. What are 3 ways organizations could inspire civic engagement among young people today and engage them in advocacy? So what do we need to do? 3 things.
Yeah, and I think it's different for every organization, right? I mean, there are, there's, what the Democratic Party should do, what the Republican Party should do, what, a business should do, what a podcast should do, right? They're all different questions. I think it's important, big picture for all of them. The biggest recommendation I'll have is, I think this applies to every single demographic of life, right? People don't like entering an organization where they're the only one of that organization. I'm used to that, so it's whatever. Like when I'm on a board, I'm the only young person there. I'm fine with that because that's how like my entire life is. So I'm used to it. But a lot of young people do not like being the only young person in an organization, right?
Right.
And again, that applies to anything. If you're the only woman in an organization, you probably wouldn't like that very much, right? Like I think it's important for them to see other people in themselves. So I think it's really important to intentionally recruit multiple young people to be in an organization. And I think the important part of that is then they can branch out to bring their friends, right? I've been on multiple campaigns, and the campaigns that get the most young people are the ones that start out with a few, and they can bring, you say, hey, bring your friends, right? Then they bring their friends, and et cetera, et cetera, and that's like any club or anything. You can't just focus on one person. But I think it is important to have that one youth surrogate that can be your effective advocate. Number 2, of course, is you have to use social media, and not just Facebook, not even Twitter. Twitter's not even that used among non-political Gen Z people, but Instagram and TikTok and even LinkedIn are really where the Gen Z is. So I think that's really important too. But I think just primarily it's messaging in a way that actually works. And I even noticed this, like I said myself. Sometimes the this is more advice for elected officials, but again, the bureaucratic messaging does not always resonate the same way. It's kind of the authentic, like being real. And I've been struggling with this myself because I think being a Gen Z politician, I kind of have to be more wooden sometimes, because I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want to come off unprofessional, because that's the worst thing you can be as a young elected official, is be viewed as unprofessional. But I think for any organization, you have to find a way of being relatable in that way. It's not just about, trying to use Gen Z slang, but, finding people that can be your advocates to share the message and amplify the content that you have is super important for any organization.
Yeah, definitely. All right, very good. We got 5 minutes for our last
Awesome.
question. So, round five, let's get to it because this is a big one. I am curious, Nick Roberts, what trends you're currently watching and advising others to prepare for. This is Trends Talk after all, so this could
Yeah.
be political, it could be other things, but what are you keeping your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first for politics, I think it relates to Gen Z specifically, is the bridging divide between Gen Z men and Gen Z women, and
Mhm.
that's true of all races. But it should go without saying. But Gen Z men are becoming significantly more Republican, voted for Trump, I believe, and Gen Z women are becoming significantly more Democratic, voted for Kamala by a huge margin. Um, and that's from what I've seen from the numbers. Again, we have not seen the exit polls that are final to confirm these, but I mean, there wasn't a historic gender gap, but there was. It was. I mean, it was huge. It wasn't the biggest it's ever been, but it was still massive. And for Gen Z, it was the biggest it's ever been. So and I think as we see, people age, I think, and as we see younger people coming into the electorate, I think that will only probably continue to expand. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I think social media is the driving factor. I have seen so many men that I went to school with, like even my twin brother is a huge Republican. Um, people I went to school with that were even like Bernie Sanders fans in 2016 and all these things that have become really right wing over the last few years. And I think part of it is just the social media algorithm and the content that is given to Gen Z men. Like for this election, I was given nonstop advertisements from a group. I don't know if you've heard of the Nelk Boys. And actually, I was a big fan in the back. They're pranksters and they're just hilarious people, but they've become huge Trumpers. And I don't watch any of that stuff anymore, but I don't watch them at all anymore. But like I used to watch them in high school, and I got nonstop advertising from them about, Trump needs you for this election. Make sure to register to vote. Make sure to vote for Trump. All these things. And I mean, as far as I know, there was not any Kamala specific Gen Z content for men. I mean, Trump was going on all these, Gen Z right wing. Not like Joe Rogan's not super right wing, but has more of a right wing audience probably. But
Right.
obviously Theo Vaughn, all these guys, the Nelk Boys too. And I know Kamala tried that, and obviously the call her daddy thing, but has never really hit the same audience that Trump did. So I think we're seeing that. I think it'll be fascinating how, again, over these next few years, how that will continue to grow. I think sometimes, as we know with trends, trends do not slow down; they continue and they accelerate. I think when Gen Z women are seeing all their friends voting for Democrats, it's probably not fun to be the only Republican, and vice versa for men. Especially for men, I think, unfortunately, being a man or voting for Kamala is not really Trump has so much machismo and all that. I think people are really attracted to it. I think Democrats are really going to need to work on recruiting Gen Z men, but also, again, how to continue to expand our margins of Gen Z women, get them out to vote, and mobilizing their friends. And I think we're doing well on that front. We need to make sure we, can do well in Gen Z men because, again, that was not a Republican demographic until recently. Barack Obama won Gen Z men by a huge margin, both of his wins. Even Hillary Clinton won Gen Z men in 2016 and Joe Biden in 2020. So we have to find ways of pulling that back. And I think we have to figure out how to cultivate social media to our advantage so they get our information and they're not just believing the right wing narrative.
Right,
So
right.
I think that's the most interesting one. There's others I get into, but for the sake of time, that'll be the one I talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Our time is about up. This was really interesting. So we've talked about social media. We've talked about gender divide. We've talked about the rise of the untraditional politician. It was really, really good, Nick. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for sharing a little bit of your wisdom as to why you've run for office. And hopefully other young people will be inspired to follow suit because we need them, right?
That's right. We
Need
definitely need
them.
people
We need
involved.
Gen Z at the forefront. So, thank you
Yeah.
very much for your time. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to an episode of Trends Talk.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Thanks. Bye.